Sometimes I wake from dreams of battle. Pilot's blood pulsing, rhythm blurring into the sound of screaming engines, diving, winding through white clouds, piercing bullets, the deadly dance of eagles in the air, menacing each other with metal talons. Blue heaven above and around you, an orange hell flame in between, and a dark grave waiting 6 feet underground. Moths and red-brown rust destroying over decades, and thieves stealing your breath with blinding speed, and a whirling tornado of screaming fire, like an arrow plunging toward the blessed rest of the green earth below. By some miracle, I make it back, limping and rolling to the hangar. I lie awake there, dreaming of flying again, pursued by my greatest fear. A malevolent force beyond all hope of glory and desire, sucking me down into the paralyzed, still vacuum of conversation in a museum, scattering dust and dissipating those sacred split seconds, that summit of my existence and the risk of my destruction. Those moments in the sky when I am on the edge of death, and yet so fiercely alive.
Chapter 1. Billy peered out the window of the taxi as it made its way across the English countryside, clutching his box of paints and brushes in one hand and his small tablet computer in the other, with a book he had purchased at Heathrow Airport. "Mum, why are we driving on the wrong side of the road?" he asked, still having a feeling of strangeness when visiting England, mixed in with a sense of magic. He was going to see his great-grandmother, and she was always interesting. "Just because," she said, patting his arm and leaning down. Then, in a quiet but playful voice, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do." Jane was somewhat enchanted with England herself. She had been since she was a child, and it was only recently that Grandmother Edith had moved back across the ocean to return to the village she once knew, as she had put it. 98 years old, gentle on the surface, but strong as the hills, and a mind still clear, especially for the stories she loved to tell, about learning how to fly when other women barely had the vote, about the Second World War and the bombing of London, about the love she had for the countryside and the rolling hills. Jane intoned, "Born at the end of the First World War, and just in time for the Second," as Grandmother Edith had always said, with a sparkle in her eye and strength in her spine. "Dear Grandma," Jane said, sighing, watching Billy taking in the countryside, wishing Edith had stayed in the United States, where she had been for part of the year ever since the war had ended. But she always made a trip back to England for gardening season, dear. A plane flew by in the distance, the sunlight glinting off silver wings, and Jane thanked the heavens that Grandmother Edith had finally given up flying. All the arguments, raised voices, and pleading from various generations, officials, and experts had been met with a genteel smile, a wagging finger, and something along the lines of, "Now, gentlemen, I was flying before the lot of you were even born," and that she had passed her vision tests. Jane and various others had been tempted to bribe the doctor into failing her on purpose. Even the government officials, local or from London, were no help, and all Grandmother would do was wink and say, "Well now, do you believe that I've friends in high places now, dearie?" Jane couldn't help smiling to herself. "You go, Grandma. Give 'em hell." Any woman who could survive the firebombing of London and wind up having tea with Winston Churchill, and then go on to found her own flight school, was certainly worth her salt.
"Mum, are you gathering wool?" Billy asked, imitating her facial expressions with a 6-year-old's exaggeration, raising his eyebrow in that unconscious, overstated way,
which always made her want to giggle. "Why, yes, I am, Billy. And look," she pointed at the fields. "There's some wool right now." They passed some grazing, munching sheep that seemed placidly content. Jane rolled down the window on impulse, and it was delightful. The smell of freshly cut grass, of field and farm and autumn leaves, rolled in, crowding out the sterile air of the car. In this corner of England, the development had not progressed as much, and she felt a sense of home in the stones of the hedgerows and green ivy and yellow daisies. By the time they reached Dragonhurst Cottage, Jane was a bit drowsy, but pleasantly so. Billy was too wired to take a nap, so he sprang out of the car as soon as it came to a stop in the familiar little round drive, surrounded by various flowers. "Thank you, Miss Jane." The driver took his tip of crisp paper currency and came around to unload the car. "I expect you'll be wanting me to bring these round back." He cocked his head towards the cottage and the outbuildings. Tom was a little bit of everything in grandmother's village, the parish of Carlton Coville. He was part driver, part mechanic, and part conspirator, still arranging for her to go on occasional airplane rides. "Thank you, Tom," said Jane, and eyed him. How are grandfather's model planes doing these days? Tom took his hat off and put it on his chest, bowing his head a bit. May he rest in peace. The planes are doing well, good as new. Sometimes the local school kids come by, and I give them a bit of an air show. They'll be ready if and when you'd like them to be passed on. "What planes?" called Billy from the front doorstep, and then peered back in the front door. Jane put her finger to her mouth. "Shh, eh?" And Tom winked, nodding, and coughed. "Oh, I was just telling your mother about some model planes I was building," he said, as he carried the luggage around back of the cottage and disappeared. Grandmother Edith opened the door and gathered them into her arms, and it felt like a century had passed since the last time they had seen her. Wars and peace and generations and stories all wrapped up in her keen eyes. And still the twinkle was there, ageless, like the garden. A bit later, they gathered in the study, and Jane felt a mixture of summer, autumn, and sadness, mixed in with joy, a sense of belonging, hope, and accepting mortality. Jane felt the whisper of death and the passing of seasons, while sitting so close to Grandmother Edith, who would spurn any attempts to treat her as old, even though she'd lived 10 lifetimes, and maybe more. They were quiet, without needing to be, gazing at each other. And Jane wanted to cry, wondering how lonely Edith felt with grandfather gone. "Oh, Grandma," Jane said, "whatever are we going to do with you?" She breathed in the scent of leather, musty books, and the immense weight of being there, and grandfather not being there. She held it in. It rose from her heart. It trembled on her lip, and she lifted out of the seat as Edith drew her in. "Oh, dearie," Grandma said, stroking her hair. Now, that's all right." And Jane wept. She had not meant to. She had told herself on the flight over that she would not, that she was a grown woman with a child and a mortgage and a reasonable grip on herself, and that she was not going to cry within the first hour of arriving. But here she was. The study smelled of leather and old paper, and something else she could never identify. Some particular compound of this room and this house and this woman that she had been breathing since she was small. Grandfather's reading chair was still in the corner. Someone had left a book open on the side table, face down, the spine slightly cracked. The way Grandfather used to leave books that he intended to come back to. He was not coming back to it. Edith held her without speaking, which was exactly right, and let the tea go cold, and Jane pressed her face into the shoulder of a woman who had been holding people together for nearly a century, and clearly intended to keep doing it. After a while, the weeping slowed, and Jane breathed and looked up. Edith's face was calm and a little amused, and entirely without pity, which was the thing Jane had always loved most about her grandmother. She did not pity you. She simply waited for you to be done, and then carried on. Better? Edith asked. Better, said Jane. Billy, who had been sitting very still on the ottoman with his box of paints, watching this with the uncertain expression of a 6-year-old who does not know whether this is a sad thing or a normal thing, offered Jane a tissue from the box on the side table. He had found the tissue box and positioned himself next to it at some point during the weeping without being asked, which was, Jane thought, very Billy. Thank you, sweetheart, she said. You're welcome, he said seriously. I also cry sometimes. I know you do. It's okay, he informed her. Edith watched this exchange with an expression that Jane could not quite read. Pleasure and something older than pleasure, something that had more time in it. She patted Jane's hand. While I've got the chance, this is the time, Edith said to herself. Now, Edith Wallace, you've faced down bleeding men, burning buildings and airplanes out of control. You can get through this. Open the box Eric gave you to pass down, and do it while you're still alive. Edith patted Jane, handing her some tissue. She handed a tissue to Billy too, as a courtesy. Now then, Edith said, settling back against the cushions with the box in her lap, and the particular expression she wore when she had decided something. Where shall we begin? Edith patted Jane, handing her some tissue. Now, young Master William, Edith said to Billy as she handed him a tissue. You're getting a good start on growing to become a man now. And one thing men like to do when they can is pass down something to future generations, she said, as she rose slowly but purposefully to reach for a special box from the shelves. A sunny day, light streaming in through the windows, coming in to get Eric for dinner, coming closer because he was hard of hearing. He showed her the box and said, "This one is to be passed down like the others, Edith, for the Order of the Dragonfly." And he smiled with that poet's smile that had always warmed her heart, even as their skin had grown wrinkly and their hair silver. Her heart caught a beat with the finality of it, knowing that this would be the last. Their children, their children's children, and now a great-grandchild coming into the world. A sense of the sacred trust hinted at by the words of men who had danced with death in the skies, who had risked life and limb for the sake of their families and friends, and kept Hitler from plunging England into darkness forever. Rescue and defend, written in Latin on each box, in between the symbols of eternity. Infinity libere et defendat infinity. Edith carefully reached for the wooden box from the shelf and set it down in Billy's lap, who politely burned with curiosity. There was always something about great-grandma. His flesh prickled a bit when he saw the phrase, which he had only seen in one other place. On a necklace his father had worn, the last time he had seen him. Go ahead, open it. It's just a few things your great-grandfather wanted you to have. Edith felt the ache of the sacrifice that soldiers make. She felt the hollow place inside her and the memory of losing her son in the Vietnam War, still hoping against hope that he was alive in a prison camp somewhere. And she felt her granddaughter's fear, with Jane's husband Sam now off in a disaster zone, flying a search and rescue helicopter. And now this great-grandson, who might end up as the only living link to this legacy someday. Rescue and defend, indeed, the words echoed in her mind with the solid authority of 1,000 flowers she had laid down at gravesides over the years. Billy looked her in the eye, and Edith held her breath. Just for a moment, she saw her husband's features outlined in her great-grandson, the blue eyes, the serious but kind stare, so old and yet so young, the Wallace legacy, the Order of the Dragonfly, rescue and defend. And then Billy pleasantly opened the box, which contained a small toy that he knew was a Spitfire, and 2 envelopes marked now and later. You can open the one marked now, Billy, Jane said, wondering whether the Order of the Dragonfly was a curse or a blessing, or something in between. She exercised her internal muscles, blowing away the butterflies floating around because of her husband, who was off in Asia trying to rescue people in terrible weather conditions, probably as a result of family tradition. Probably as a result of having received a box like this. She felt a protective reflex, an urge to take the box. After my son died, Jane, I wanted to take these boxes and burn them all, Edith said, her words touching Jane quietly. But then I remember all the men and women who died in England when Hitler attacked us. It all seemed so senseless at the time. Yet later, I came to realize how close the entire planet had come to falling into shadow. She put her hand on Jane's wrist. And I believe they died for something, for freedom. She gave a gentle squeeze. Billy opened the envelope marked now, and it contained a key. Jane gasped, and her mind did a backflip, like a ball of tightly wound yarn coming undone. She didn't know whether to feel awe, or sadness, or joy. I remember that key,